Good morning. Welcome to the Old School, a podcast about educational issues in the United States, quirks, idiosyncrasies, various other issues and traits of the American school system, and possible solutions for some of those problems, insofar as we know the solutions. Good morning, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Hello, Herr Miller. Good to see and hear you this morning. This preamble is just to tell you and myself, actually, that we need to mind our P's and Q's a little, because we have a guest that we're about to announce of some prominence, quite a bit of prominence, actually.
This is a serious guest we got here.
It is. So we need to keep our silly jokes to ourselves. I know you usually start out a conversation with, it seems there was a priest and a rabbi or something like that.
All jokes. You're in for a good joke when you start hearing the priest, the rabbi, and then run-of-the-mill Protestant minister.
Glad you threw that in there.
So we have to be on our feet. So no cussing.
No, and we like to keep the footage raw, but when Ross goes off in a direction that's quite uncomfortable, kind of like in the intro here, I have some editing rights because I do it on my computer. So keep that in mind here, Miller. So
you're the gatekeeper.
Yeah, just watch yourself. I'm a bastard.
There's no reason to be threatening.
Strange. I mean, what is that?
There's no reason to be threatening. I mean,
well, I'm really concerned here, but. Why don't we pause for a moment? We'll have some elegant transition and we'll introduce the guest as he joins us. How's that sound?
Maybe a piano interlude.
Why not?
Why not?
There's never a bad time for a piano interlude.
I'm with you.
All right, Herr Miller. So we will be back on in seconds. Actually, for the listener, it'll be immediate. So why are we even talking about it?
I don't know. You can edit this out.
maybe so. All right, there it is. So we're back after our excellent introduction, Mr. Miller, and we have an honored guest. We'd like to welcome Dr. Larry Nyland, and he has served as superintendent of schools for the last 27 years. He's currently an educational consultant, most prominently superintendent of Seattle Public Schools, and also 4 other districts. He's been and is a board member, consultant, speaker for multiple universities and international schools, the founder of Seattle Pacific University Executive Leadership Program, and a nationally recognized leader, actually a School Superintendents Association finalist for Superintendent of the Year. So we're with some rarefied crowd here, Mr. Miller.
I actually don't feel worthy of being on this call at the moment, but I'm very honored to have the good doctor here with us.
Indeed. So
Larry will do.
Larry will do.
Okay. Well, Larry, you can direct us to where. First of all, we want to welcome you. We're glad you're here. You have a lot of areas. So we told you before that we envision this as one episode of potentially many. You're interested in leadership development, racial equity, student voice, and I think we're going to start with the latter today and kind of take it where it goes. So maybe I'll just frame a question and then you can take it from there. You mentioned a topic of student voice, happy and proud. I love the sound of it. Maybe you can unpack that for us, first of all.
Sure. Yeah, I continue to be amazed after 40-some years in the education business about how much I don't know or how much I need to relearn about education. Actually, as a little tiny intro, before I get to the happy and proud, I want to say 20 years ago, it might have been longer than that, Seattle, I was not superintendent at the time, hired me to do focus groups at 10 middle schools. Mm-hmm. And so I did focus groups with students, parents, teachers, and administrators in 10 middle schools. And when I was all done, the wisdom from kids read like it came right out of the research books. Wow. So, I mean, it's kind of like kids are in the classroom all day, every day. And then I say I'm a pretty poor learner. I call myself a recovering knower. So, I try to find the right answer and then tell everybody what it is. And I guess what I'm learning more recently is the right answer is keep asking, keep talking with kids, keep listening, keep learning. Because every kid's different and times change and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, the Happy and Proud project was done by colleagues at the University of Washington Center for Educational Leadership. And I thought it was an excellent kind of research model, kind of the newer research model in terms of, well, let's just go ask the kids. So they did that, and they were working in the Yakima Valley largely with second language learners, ELL students. And so they had to figure out creative ways to unpack that learning. So they used drawings and they used graphics and they used oral interviews and teased out. And in the end, what they found was what the kids really wanted is they wanted to be happy and proud. And then you can start to unpack that, and you can go back to what I started with. I mean, you can say, "Oh, okay, got it. I've got the right answer now. Now I'll go work on making kids happy and proud." Or you can kind of use this newer model of keep asking the kids, "Well, what would it take to make you happy and proud?" That's the thumbnail sketch of what they've done.
Well, it's fascinating because you're alluding to an idea that we as adults want to solve problems, and we could potentially get in our own way by solving this. And you're saying that the students don't necessarily want or need us to solve the problem; they just need to be heard.
Right, and actually, they said that in the middle of this process. It's kind of like, we don't want you to do anything.
Yeah,
don't go survey us. Don't go. Just listen to us.
That's sort of elegant and simple. And well, let me ask one more question. I'm sure Ross has some interjection here, but what did you learn, or what did they learn that was surprising? Specifically in those two areas.
Well, one of them that was surprising to me, as in maybe a little humorous, is how do you talk to kids cross-culturally about a topic that might be difficult, where they don't feel comfortable in school, and make it safe to do so. So I mentioned that they did it through diagrams and colors and shapes and that kind of thing. And the other thing that they did was they used heroes and villains. So it was kind of like whether you played games, read comic books, it's kind of like almost everybody has a construct. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can talk about, And then, as I said earlier, one of the findings was those changed a lot, So for some kids, being on the playground was a hero moment in that they got to cluster with their friends. It wasn't as formal as a classroom. And for other kids, that was a villain because they were picked on, weren't part of the in crowd, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, a tiny illustration of why we have to keep asking, because to some extent, each kid is unique, and we can't know what's in their head without asking them.
You talked about the expression "happy and proud." What did you assume that meant? One of the things, like in debate, they always talk about defining your terms. And so when you hear something like "happy and proud," what do you assume that means? What do you assume that entails? And did your research a different meaning for those words?
Great question. And no, they didn't do that. What they did was they interviewed the kids and got their story. And then they read over like 50 stories. And then they created kind of a master story. And then they asked, and they did a wordle in between, and they did an analytic to find out, well, what are the words that kids are using so that we can capture in their voice what it is that they said. And then they took it back to, I don't know if it was the same group of students or a different group of students, and said, okay, read the story and then tell us what resonates with you. So it was more like, it was definitely kind of qualitative research as opposed to quantitative research. And then it was, I'm rusty on my research, grounded field theory. Is that what you call that?
Yeah, anything grounded theory. Yeah, that's applicable where you're working, basically.
Okay.
I'm glad you added that, because I'm not sure. I wasn't sure what that meant. I'm just, I have no background as far as research goes of that sort. So I'm kind of glad to kind of get a sense of what that exactly means. But
yeah. So anyway, then the big idea was, and then they took this to teachers. So they asked teachers, well, what do you think? Students said. And the teachers said, well, we think that they said that they wanted to be safe and they wanted to be successful academically. And so you can kind of, so if you followed up on your question and sat a group of educators down and said, all right, what would we do to make kids happy and proud? The list would be quantifiably different than if you sat them down and said, what would we do to keep kids safe and help them achieve? And then back to the original idea that's more organic. So the idea is that you could do it yourself. Actually, as I was leaving Seattle, we had one principal that we've been working on this idea. We hadn't come up with happy and proud, but we've been working on the belonging and the relationships and that kind of a thing. And they came up with, they were going to go into classrooms and ask, this is a middle school, they were going to go into a classroom and they were going to ask kids, can you tell us what you're working on? Do you know what the objective of the letter is, the lesson is? Where do you go for help? And how do you know, a question something like, how do you know if the teacher is being supportive? That's not the way it was asked, but that kind of a thing. And then they had an app, so they would go in, four of us in a classroom at a time. We would sit and talk to kids for 5-10 minutes. Then we fill out the app, and then we'd go out in the class outside the hallway and talk about it. And in the beginning, teachers were really, whoa, what are you're gonna do what? This is kind of scary. And within a few weeks, it was kind of like, oh, when can I get that data? And then within a few more weeks, it was kind of like, oh, I could ask the kids myself. So, that's the kind of the breakthrough idea, I think, is, and then I guess for Steve, it would be, how do you do that with a really, really small R and not a big R, so it's not a survey and it's not a, what's an efficient process to ask kids to get some useful information and then do something with it?
Right. Well, Larry, it's so practical. I mean, I know you know the concept of a learning walk, and we've all, that's something that I don't know how many I've led, but a lot. And the idea is that a group of teachers or administrators walk into classes for a relatively short time and get a feel for it, and then go in the hall and talk. But often they neglect the most important, the most simple step, which is to talk a little bit to the students, get a real feel, and then have that great conversation in the hallway. What a great
another one of the schools that had been doing the work for a long time. They actually brought parents in and had students lead the learning walks. And it was just amazing to hear, very quickly, really deep and thoughtful conversations with teachers, administrators, kids, and parents about, well, what did you see in the lesson that you liked? What should we do more of? So just a powerful idea.
So I'd love to imagine that in more detail. So you're saying that there's a group of students in the hall who walk into classrooms with parents. I mean, how did they execute that?
Oh, I'm a little rusty on those details, but they would schedule it, and you sign up, and then they make a reasonable group, and they have enough of a bench for students. So if you have, it was usually a classroom full of adults, And they would sit us in the classroom for a few minutes and explain what we were going to see and what we were going to look for. And then they would assign us, count off by fours or fives or whatever it was, and get assigned to a student. And the student would have their, these are the teachers that have agreed to let us come visit their classes. And they gave us a little sheet of paper to fill out. Actually, I think what they did is they asked, maybe it was 4 groups, and they had 4 questions. And so I think they asked each group to focus on one question. And then we came back at the end and said, okay, group 1, what did you see about relationships? Group 2, what did you see about relevance? Group 3, what did you see about whatever it was? Yeah.
It sounds like go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Bourgeois.
Sir, go for it.
All right. Well, when you're talking about the idea of accumulating the information, how do you get what you need from the students? To go back to the idea of happy and proud, I think certainly every teacher has the notion that they want that, or at least every well-adjusted teacher wants that. But the rub is always, how do you produce it in such a way that you don't sacrifice what you're trying to achieve, from a kind of a teaching capacity? So, for example, I teach U.S. history. I'm teaching juniors, and most of them are well equipped to argue personal points of view, certainly more lately than before. But the idea that they don't have an issue with that. One of the things that I always try to create is an atmosphere by which we discuss ideas, not people, and in an attempt to try to teach civility, but also how do you appropriately, respectfully argue positions. At the same time, one of the things that I risk is that the kid may not always feel safe. And from a philosophical point of view, I'm not sure safe in the way that I am thinking of it is beneficial. So when you think about the word safe and you think about how you are trying to create happy, proud individuals, pride presumably coming from a sense of confidence in what they know, how to use it, things of that nature. How do you fit in the kind of what I see as a kind of a natural uncomfortability that should go along with education?
Yeah. Well, one of the big ideas is identity. So, how do I make sure that students know that they're okay? And a fair amount of my time has been spent in communities with Native students, and so they're kind of a minority amongst minorities. Never see themselves in terms of print, media, movies, et cetera, unless it's as a stereotype of 100 years ago. So how do you create an identity that says it's okay to be a Native or Black or Hispanic and to be a good student? So a lot of districts have gone to it's been fascinating to see how people evolve. And I think in Seattle, we said we want every student to be known by name, need, and strength. And then other districts have moved it to name, strength, and dream, kind of accentuating the positive parts of it more than the gap and the negative part of it. But I think the bigger underlying idea is how do you make sure that the student has an identity? So if they love baseball, somebody knows that and has that as a point of contact with them. If they're really proud of their heritage, how do you recognize that? And then I suppose, depending on who you have in your classroom, having some cultural relevance so that some of the issues that you talk about are issues that resonate more with that community than kind of the stereotypical mainstream white history, I guess. But yeah, a real challenge, particularly in districts. A lot of our districts around the Seattle area are 150 languages and 150 nations. So doing something for each culture is not sometimes, you can't do that.
Right.
So Larry, in some sense, we're still talking about training school administrators and teachers to make this happen. I would say that a good teacher, a great teacher, in fact, would include student voice in everything and cultivate that. A lot of teachers will say that they're too busy. They're trying to raise their achievement level and so forth. Yeah. But is there a way systematically to help teachers to do what we think they should do, which is to get to know these students and let them become who they are right in that classroom?
Yeah. So Ross, that'd be an interesting one. It's kind of like, so what, how do we train teachers today? What do teachers try to do? So part of the pedagogy is, I suppose we're talking about a different kind of pedagogy. So rather than the stand and deliver, it's more of a, how would I seat kids in a circle and how would I have them engage in a polite, respectful, maybe difficult conversation with competing ideas, maybe without me present. I've seen teachers do that so that they start out moderating around the circle, and then they're one in the circle, and then they're one chair behind the circle. And then they're having the same kind of conversations around student voice, but around student behavior. So it's kind of like, so how did that conversation go? Who talked the most? Were we respectful to each other's idea? What happened when Maria took on Sam in terms of a different point of view? So it's still pedagogy, but it's kind of pedagogy on the run to try to figure out what do we need right now in this moment to help move that conversation? Well, not the conversation, what would the word be? The discussion skill
right.
forward. Because I love your idea, Ross, that we don't want to shield kids from, we don't want to make them bubble wrap. We do want them to be exposed to difficult conversations, but in a way that's measured so that they're not just turned off from their school or their relationships.
And I think in the high school setting, it tends to be a little bit difficult. There's a couple of things happening, especially from the modern student. You're talking about how the students themselves will kind of moderate and kind of referee, for lack of a better word, how the discussion goes. And students are quite willing to do that, but also the idea that at this point, their intellectual ideas are more a form of emoting than it is reason. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to create the method of reasoning. And so it can be a sloppy, messy process, but hopefully in the end, with a dedicated teacher and respectful students, perhaps you can get there.
I think
I love your idea because I think that takes us beyond the happy and proud to right. How do you create a community of learners that makes that happen for everybody in the group, so that we're all looking out for each other in the group, and we're taking that idea and that culture with us. I mean, that's because you're right. I mean, when they leave the classroom, we're not going to be there to protect them or validate them or affirm them. Somehow they're going to have to figure out how to do that on their own.
Well, Larry, I think Ross is being a little modest as far as what he does in the classroom. He's expert at doing this.
Awesome.
Yeah, he creates it's really a year-long discussion, and there are definitely parameters of being polite, but also being willing to be questioned, and so he will ask hard questions, and is quite comfortable following up with a student when they're even publicly struggling to, but that builds trust in him because he's
sure.
And in time it does work. And then ideally, and Ross, you can maybe speak to that. There would be student to student conversation where you sit back proud and happy, right?
Well, one, you see it in the class, but what really makes you want to cavil is the idea that they'll come back to you later and say, we were talking about such and such over the cafeteria table.
Wow.
and then you just sit there and just like, my job here is done. But it is an ongoing process. But I mean, the idea that those conversations continue outside the classroom, hearing from parents saying, our kid always brings up at the dinner table, what you and your class were talking about, and it becomes a discussion for the family. And at that point, you just kind of want to high five yourself, because it would seem unseemly to just go around bragging about how your kids are talking about everything you talk about in class. But
so I'm fascinated with the idea of positive outliers. So, and I've not seen any of the student voice go to that level yet. So I suppose we would do it through a walk, and we would see your classroom, and then we would maybe suggest to another teacher that they come visit, or maybe try to elevate it and have you describe what you're doing. But yeah, great. And I assume that it evolves, that, on day one in your class, you're not able to have the conversations that you're able to have near the end.
Right.
So that means that you have to evolve. Maybe you recognize the same path through the forest, but you have to evolve with the kids from day 1 to day 31.
Yeah, in the beginning, the conversations are fairly certainly not provocative. The first day you're just dealing with getting the students used to the notion of talking, because in a lot of classrooms today, they simply don't talk, and the teacher doesn't want to run that gauntlet, But at the same time, you ask yourself, where do the kids get to a point where they're confident, where they are proud of their ability to interact with folks without causing greater animosity or what have you? It starts with simply just talking in front of other folks, and then after that, you can start kind of narrowing things down and getting a little bit more interesting as you go through the school year.
Well, I love the idea of starting out with this topic of the students, and the directness of actually asking them is a wonderful thing. I wonder, if we can push to another conversation about leadership. We haven't really talked a lot about school leadership, but maybe planting a seed for another talk. How can a school leader foster this? Because that's an environment. You create an environment where teachers can listen to students and vice versa. But that's my idea for down the road. Do you have any closing thoughts or ideas, Larry, you wanted to add to our conversation?
Oh yeah, your leadership one pushes me off on the learning walk. Right. I actually worked with the University of Washington Center for Educational Leadership for a time, and led principals and superintendents who hadn't been doing the learning walks.
Yeah.
And kind of moving from the learning walks as what's my metaphor? My metaphor is, if I was a first grade teacher and I never taught anybody anything, I just walked around and talked to students one-on-one, in today's day and age anyway, I wouldn't be seen as a very good teacher. And so I tend to put learning walks in that category. It's kind of like, well, walking around and seeing random groups of random individual teachers teaching is not a very good teaching model. So then how does the leader, a principal, how do they walk through the building and find Ross's class and say, wow, Ross is really onto something, and we really need to elevate student voice. So now, how do I do the same thing for teachers that Ross is doing for students? How would I elevate that conversation? And, would I have Ross share? Would I find a research article? Would I ask Ross if we can bring groups of 4 or 5 teachers in at a time to watch it? And then how would I measure it, by learning walks or by other forms, so that over time, every teacher was starting to approximate the kind of work that Ross is doing. So, yeah, that's why I keep doing this work. It's kind of like, it's exciting for me we keep learning more, and, gradually it finds its way into our practice to And we're really, for me, that's an equity issue in terms of, unless we can help a whole new generation of marginalized kids also be happy and proud, they don't have much of a future. And we as a community school nation don't have much of a future.
Wonderful. I think that's a great closing thought. Ross, and anything to add before we say adieu?
I almost don't want to ruin it. It was such a great ending, that kind of that last point that Larry made. I almost don't want to mess it up. So I think we go with as it is. So
that sounds good. Now, I just said a French word, adieu. Does that mean hello or goodbye?
Maybe it's like aloha. You can do it go both ways. I think it's goodbye though. So
okay, well, let's think so. But I like the idea of hello embedded in that as well. Well, Larry, thank you so much. We've enjoyed this, and we do hope that we can do some more of these.
Enjoyed the conversation. You asked good questions, and it's around a good topic.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again.